Hotel Maid answered a call in ancient language in front of a vampire king. Ending was shocking. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's tale. It all began on a rainy evening at a grand, yet mysterious hotel tucked away in the heart of the city. The lavish lobby gleamed with golden chandeliers and velvet curtains, an air of secrecy hanging in the air. As the clock ticked past midnight, the usual bustle of the hotel began to settle into a quiet lull. Among the staff was Clara, a young maid who worked the night shift. Clara was used to the monotony of her job, dusting, vacuuming, and tidying up after guests who seemed to come and go without leaving a trace. But tonight, something felt different. The usual hum of the hotel was interrupted by an odd ringing. Clara paused, looking up from the pile of linens in her hands. The sound was unmistakable, a phone, yet she had never seen one in the hotel's old-fashioned office. The call echoed through the empty hallways as Clara's curiosity piqued. She hesitated for a moment, but then decided to answer, unsure of what to expect. To her surprise, the voice on the other end was unlike anything she had heard before. It was not in English, but in a language she could not place. Ancient, archaic, and filled with an eerie resonance that sent a chill down her spine. She didn't understand the words, but they felt oddly familiar, as if they were pulling something from deep within her. Her hand trembled slightly as she held the receiver to her ear. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice shaky, the unknown language still swirling in her mind. The voice on the other end remained silent for a long moment before speaking again, its tone colder this time, almost urgent. "Do you know what you have just done?" The words were now in perfect English, but the question hung heavy in the air, like a dark omen. Clara's heart skipped a beat as a strange feeling washed over her, as if she were in the presence of something much older and more powerful than herself. "What is this? What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. At that very moment, the large double doors to the hotel lobby swung open with a creak. Standing in the doorway was a man whose presence commanded attention. Tall, imposing, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to pierce through the dim light of the lobby. His dark coat billowed as he stepped forward, the room growing colder with each step he took. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She knew at that instant that this was no ordinary man. His gaze locked onto hers, and she felt as though time itself had slowed. The moment he spoke, his voice was deep, almost otherworldly. "I believe you are the one I've been searching for." Clara's mind raced. Who was this man? How did he know about the call she had just answered? She had a sinking feeling that her life was about to change forever, and not for the better. "You answered the call," he continued, his voice filled with a strange authority. "You have awakened something long dormant, something that should have stayed buried." As he approached, Clara instinctively took a step back, her mind a whirl of confusion and fear. What was going on? And who was this man really? Clara's heart raced as the stranger approached her, his every step deliberate, as if the weight of centuries was carried with him. His dark eyes never left hers, each second stretching into an eternity as he came closer. The chill in the air seemed to grow with each of his steps, the warmth of the lobby evaporating into nothingness. She stood frozen in place, unable to move, her mind struggling to grasp the reality of the situation. "Who are you?" she finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling. The man stopped just a few feet away, his gaze steady but piercing. "I am the Vampire King," he replied, his voice low and commanding. Clara blinked, not sure if she had heard him correctly. "Vampire King?" she repeated, her mind racing to make sense of his words. The man nodded, his sharp features remaining expressionless. "You have awakened something by answering the call, something that should have remained hidden." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Clara felt her stomach churn. How could she have possibly awakened anything? She had only answered the phone out of curiosity. But this man, no, this being, was not human. His presence was undeniable, as though the very air around him held a power that defied reason. "What do you mean?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of fear. The man stepped closer, his gaze narrowing. The language you spoke, the ancient language, it is no mere coincidence. It is the language of the bloodlines, of the cursed ones. And now you are connected to it. Clara felt her blood run cold. Cursed? She echoed, trying to make sense of his words. The vampire king let out a low sigh, his expression darkening. Long ago, my family made a pact that tied us to an ancient curse. The curse was supposed to be broken, but it never was. The key to unlocking it is a voice, and that voice was yours. Clara shook her head in confusion, unable to fully understand. What do you want from me? She asked, feeling trapped. The vampire king's gaze softened, just for a moment, before it returned to its cold intensity. I need you to help me break the curse. But first, you must understand the consequences of your actions. Clara's heart beat faster as she took a step back, instinctively trying to distance herself from him. I don't understand. I'm just a maid. I don't know anything about curses or ancient languages. The vampire king stepped forward, his voice lowering to a whisper that sent shivers down her spine. That's exactly why you are the one. You are a key, Clara. A key to unlocking the past and the future of our kind. His words lingered in the air, heavy and foreboding. Clara felt a surge of panic rise within her. She had no idea what he was talking about, but she could feel the truth in his words. This was no ordinary encounter. This was the beginning of something far bigger than herself. How do I fit into all of this? Clara asked, her voice trembling. The vampire king regarded her with a long, silent look, as if deciding how much to reveal. You are the last living descendant of the witch who cursed us, he finally said, his tone almost regretful. Clara's eyes widened in shock. What? She breathed, unable to process what he was saying. You are connected to the very bloodline that caused the curse, he repeated. Your grandmother, or rather, the witch you descend from, was the one who bound us to this fate. Clara took a step back, the realization hitting her like a tidal wave. Her grandmother had always been mysterious, but this was beyond anything she could have ever imagined. But I don't know anything about witches or curses, Clara protested, her voice shaking. The vampire king's gaze softened for a brief moment, his voice quieter. You may not know, but your blood knows. And that is what we must unlock. Clara's head spun as the weight of his words sank in. She felt like she was standing at the edge of something she couldn't escape, a force far beyond her control pulling her into its depths. What happens if I don't help you? She asked, fear creeping into her voice. The vampire king's eyes darkened. If you refuse, the curse will never be broken. The consequences of that are unimaginable. Clara swallowed hard, her mind racing. She didn't want to be part of this, didn't want to be tied to this dark world of vampires and curses. But she had no choice. The pull was too strong. I'll help you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The vampire king nodded, his eyes studying her with an intensity that made her feel as though he could see into her very soul. Then we begin. Clara stood there, her heart pounding in her chest as the weight of the vampire king's words hung in the air. She had agreed to help him, but she had no idea what that truly meant. As the king turned and began to walk down the grand hallway of the hotel, Clara hesitated for a moment before following. The ancient stone walls seemed to echo their footsteps, the flickering candlelight casting long, eerie shadows. Clara had never been this far into the hotel before, and everything about this place seemed to pulse with a strange, unexplainable energy. They reached a large, ornate door at the end of the corridor, and the vampire king stopped. This is where it begins, he said, his voice deep and resolute. Clara glanced at the door, feeling a chill run through her spine. The door was intricately carved, with symbols she couldn't recognize, symbols that seemed to shimmer and change before her eyes. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, her mind racing. The room was vast, unlike anything she had ever seen. A large, circular table stood in the center, covered with old books, ancient scrolls, and strange artifacts that seemed to hum with power. The walls were lined with shelves filled with dusty tomes and trinkets from centuries past. As she stepped further into the room, she noticed an old mirror hanging on the far wall. It was unlike any mirror she had ever seen. Its frame was carved with the same symbols as the door, and its surface was smooth but dark, reflecting nothing but the shadows in the room. This is the mirror of souls, the vampire king said, his voice softer now, as if he were explaining a secret. It is said that it can show you the past, the present, and the future, but only if you are willing to see the truth. Clara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. What was the truth? And why did he want her to see it? She had no answers, but she felt an overwhelming sense of dread building inside her. The Vampire King motioned for her to approach the mirror. Stand before it, he instructed. Clara hesitated, but then slowly made her way toward the mirror, her heart racing with every step. She stopped just in front of it, staring into its dark surface. At first, she saw nothing, just her reflection, pale and uncertain, staring back at her. But then, the shadows in the mirror seemed to shift. The air grew heavier, and the temperature in the room dropped. Clara's breath became visible, forming a faint cloud in front of her face. Suddenly, the reflection in the mirror changed. It was no longer Clara standing there, but a woman, her grandmother. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the face, even though she had never seen her grandmother as a young woman. The image was blurry at first, but then it sharpened, and Clara saw the woman standing in a dark, stone room, much like the one she was in now. The woman was chanting something in that ancient language, the same language Clara had spoken when she answered the phone. The voice was low, powerful, filled with an unearthly resonance. Clara watched in silence as the woman's hands moved in complex patterns, weaving some kind of magic. A strange, golden light began to form around her, coiling like a serpent. The image shifted again, and Clara saw the woman standing before a group of figures that seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. They were vampires, their eyes burning with a fierce, unyielding hunger. The woman stood in front of them, her posture defiant, as if she were challenging them. This is how the curse began. The Vampire King's voice echoed from behind her, pulling Clara from her trance. Your grandmother, the witch, made a pact with us. A pact that bound our fates together. But the cost was high. The curse she invoked was meant to protect us, but it trapped us instead. And now, you must help us break it. Clara turned to face him, her mind spinning. But I don't understand. What does this have to do with me? She asked, her voice trembling. The Vampire King stepped closer, his gaze intense. You are the descendant of the one who created this curse. You carry her blood, and that blood is the key to unlocking it. Clara felt her stomach drop. She had always known there was something unusual about her family, something her grandmother had never explained. But this was beyond anything she could have imagined. So what do I have to do? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King's eyes softened for a moment, but his expression was still grim. You must find the other pieces of the spell, he said. There are 3 more artifacts, pieces of the curse, that were hidden long ago. Only by finding them can we destroy the curse once and for all. Clara's mind raced. Where do I start? She asked. The Vampire King's gaze hardened. You start by trusting me, he replied. And by doing so, you will find the strength to face the truth that awaits you. Clara looked at him, unsure of what to believe. But deep down, she knew she had no choice. The path she had just stepped onto was dark and dangerous, and there was no turning back. Clara's mind raced as the Vampire King's words sank in. The path ahead was dangerous, and there was no turning back. She had agreed to help him, but she had no idea what the cost would be. The curse that had bound the Vampire Kingdom for centuries was now in her hands, and she had to find the 3 other artifacts to break it. But where would she begin? She glanced at the Vampire King, who stood motionless beside the ancient mirror, his expression unreadable. What happens if I fail? She asked, her voice filled with doubt. The Vampire King turned to her, his amber eyes cold and steady. Failure is not an option, he replied, his voice low and dangerous. The consequences would be far worse than you can imagine. Not just for you, but for the entire world. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. She had already seen the power the Vampire King commanded. But this was something else entirely. Where do we start? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King stepped closer, his eyes dark with intent. There is one artifact we know of, he said. The Eye of Eternity. It's the first piece of the curse, hidden in an ancient crypt deep beneath the earth. Clara's heart skipped a beat. A crypt? How could she possibly find something buried so far underground? And what if the crypt was protected by even more dangerous forces? How do we get there? She asked, the fear creeping into her voice. The Vampire King's gaze softened for a brief moment, but his voice remained firm. You will not be alone in this, he assured her. I will guide you. With that, the Vampire King turned toward the door, his dark cloak trailing behind him like a shadow. Clara followed, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what awaited them, but she knew she had to follow him. The weight of the mission pressed heavily on her shoulders, but there was no turning back now. The hallway seemed endless, the flickering lights casting strange shadows on the walls. Clara's steps echoed in the silence as they made their way toward the exit of the hotel. As they reached the main doors, the Vampire King paused and turned to her. Are you ready? He asked, his voice steady but tinged with something Clara couldn't quite place. I don't know, Clara admitted, feeling the weight of uncertainty. Wash over her. But I don't have a choice, do I? The Vampire King's lips curled into a faint smile. No, you don't. With a deep breath, Clara nodded, steeling herself for the unknown. She followed him out into the night, the cold air biting at her skin. The city was quiet, the streets empty, as though the world was holding its breath. The Vampire King led her down a narrow alley, past darkened buildings, until they reached an old, abandoned warehouse. Clara glanced around nervously. The air felt thick with something, darkness, perhaps, or danger. She had no way of knowing what lay ahead. The Vampire King stopped at a large, rusted door and placed his hand on it. The door creaked open with a long, drawn-out sound, revealing a staircase that led deep underground. The air grew colder as they descended, the darkness swallowing them whole. With each step, Clara's anxiety grew. She didn't know what to expect in this crypt, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. As they reached the bottom, the ground beneath her feet felt uneven, the air damp and musty. A low hum filled the air, as though the very earth itself was alive. The Vampire King stepped forward, his presence commanding the space around them. Stay close, he instructed, his voice a whisper in the dark. Clara nodded and followed him, her footsteps light against the stone floor. The crypt was vast, its walls lined with ancient carvings and symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. The further they ventured, the more Clara felt the weight of history pressing down on her. This place was old, older than anything she had ever known. They came to a large chamber, its center dominated by a stone pedestal. Resting on top of it was a large, glowing orb. Clara's eyes widened as she recognized the artifact, the Eye of Eternity. But as she stepped closer, a low growl echoed from the shadows. Clara froze, her heart racing. From the darkness, a creature emerged, half human, half beast, with glowing red eyes that seemed to pierce through the shadows. The creature snarled, its claws extended, ready to strike. Clara's breath caught in her throat. What is that? She whispered, fear flooding her veins. The Vampire King stood tall, unshaken by the creature's appearance. A guardian of the eye, he explained calmly. We must defeat it to claim the artifact. Clara felt a surge of panic, but she knew there was no turning back. The creature lunged at them, its claws slashing through the air. Without thinking, Clara grabbed a nearby sword that lay on the ground. She wasn't trained for combat, but she had no choice. She swung the sword, her hands trembling, and managed to land a hit on the creature's side. It howled in pain, but it didn't stop. The battle raged on, with Clara struggling to hold her ground. The Vampire King fought with a grace and precision that left Clara in awe, but she couldn't focus on that now. The creature was relentless, and Clara's strength was waning. Finally, with one final, powerful strike, the Vampire King brought the creature to the ground. It lay still, the glow in its eyes fading. Clara stood there, panting, her heart racing, as the Vampire King approached the pedestal. The first piece is ours, he said, his voice filled with triumph. Clara felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She had made it through the first test, but she knew that the worst was yet to come. With the Eye of Eternity in their hands, the journey to break the curse had only just begun. Clara's heart was still pounding from the battle they had just fought. The room was filled with a tense silence, the air thick with the lingering scent of danger. She stood beside the Vampire King, her eyes fixed on the Eye of Eternity now resting on the pedestal. They had successfully retrieved the first artifact, but Clara knew this was only the beginning. As she took a deep breath, Trying to steady her nerves, the Vampire King turned to face her. "This is just the first piece," he said quietly, his voice holding a weight of responsibility. "There are 2 more artifacts we must find, each guarded by challenges of their own. The path ahead will only get more dangerous." Clara nodded, the reality of their mission settling deeper within her. She had no choice but to continue. The fate of both their worlds was at stake. "Where do we go next?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. The Vampire King's amber eyes met hers. "There is a place called the Forgotten Tomb," he said. "It lies deep in the heart of the Black Forest, a place untouched by time. It holds the second artifact, the Heart of Shadows." Clara felt a chill run through her at the name of the forest. The Black Forest was known in legends for its untold dangers, wild creatures, magical traps, and ancient forces that no one had dared to disturb for centuries. "How do we even get to this tomb?" she asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. The Vampire King smirked faintly, his expression unreadable. "I have my ways," he replied cryptically. Without another word, he turned toward the exit of the crypt, the Eye of Eternity carefully placed in a protective case in his hand. Clara followed him, her steps hesitant but determined. They made their way back to the surface, the night air biting at Clara's skin as they left the cold, damp tomb behind. The Vampire King led her through the streets, his cloak billowing behind him like a shadow. He moved with purpose, his every step confident, as though he were the ruler of everything around him. Clara couldn't help but feel the weight of his presence, a power that seemed to stretch across time and space. They reached a hidden alley, far from the prying eyes of the world. The Vampire King stopped and turned to face her. "We must travel to the Black Forest immediately," he said, his voice low. "The longer we wait, the more likely it is that the artifacts will be discovered by those who wish to stop us." Clara nodded, understanding the urgency. She had no idea what they were about to face, but she had already come this far. She had to keep going. The Vampire King reached into the folds of his cloak and produced a small, intricate device. He held it up to the moonlight, revealing a strange symbol etched into its surface. "This is the key," he said. "It will guide us to the tomb, but it must be activated by the Heart of Shadows itself. We must be quick." Clara took a step forward, her curiosity piqued. "What exactly is this Heart of Shadows?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. The Vampire King's expression darkened. "The Heart of Shadows is a powerful relic, the second piece of the curse. It was once part of the original pact that bound us, but it was lost over time. The one who possesses it has the power to manipulate shadows, control minds, and even bend time itself. We cannot allow it to fall into the wrong hands." Clara shivered at the thought. She had heard of such powers in stories, but never had she imagined they were real. They were standing on the edge of something far more dangerous than she had ever known. The Vampire King led Clara to an old, weathered carriage waiting for them in the alley. It was drawn by a pair of black horses, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Clara couldn't help but feel uneasy as they climbed aboard, the wheels creaking beneath them as the carriage began to move. As they left the city behind, Clara glanced out the window, watching the dark landscape unfold before her. The Black Forest was still hours away, but she could already feel the weight of it in the air. The forest was alive with a strange energy, and Clara had no idea what awaited them there. As the carriage rumbled on, the Vampire King spoke again. "The forest is home to many creatures, some hostile, some neutral. You will need to stay close to me at all times. Trust no one." Clara nodded, her mind racing with questions, but she knew better than to ask them now. The forest was waiting. Soon, they would be plunged into its depths, and Clara wasn't sure if she would come out the same person. They traveled through the night, the moon casting an eerie glow over the landscape as they approached the edge of the Black Forest. The trees loomed ahead, twisted and ancient, their branches stretching like skeletal fingers toward the sky. Clara's breath caught in her throat as they entered the forest shadow. The air grew colder, and the sounds of the world outside seemed to fade away. The Black Forest was a place of magic, of secrets and dangers, and Clara was about to face its greatest challenge. The Vampire King's gaze never wavered as they continued on, his expression set with determination. "We are close," he murmured. "Stay alert. The tomb is hidden deep within these woods, but finding it will not be easy. Clara's heart raced, knowing that the next step would be even more perilous than the last. But there was no turning back. The quest to break the curse had only just begun, and she was in it until the very end. The darkness of the Black Forest was overwhelming as Clara and the Vampire King made their way deeper into the heart of the ancient woods. The air grew denser with each step, thick with an unnatural chill that seemed to press against Clara's chest. The trees were towering, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes, creating an eerie canopy overhead. The silence was unnerving. No birds, no animals, just the sound of their footsteps crunching on the leaf-covered ground. The Vampire King moved with ease, as though he knew exactly where he was going, while Clara followed closely behind, her senses on high alert. The further they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The forest felt alive, as if it were watching them, waiting for them to make a wrong move. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond her sight. "How much farther?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Vampire King glanced over his shoulder, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "We are almost there," he replied, his voice as steady as ever. "But stay alert. The forest does not take kindly to intruders." Clara nodded, trying to steady her breathing as they continued their journey. The moonlight filtered through the dense canopy above, casting eerie shadows across their path. Clara's eyes darted around, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar landscape. The forest seemed to change with every step, the trees growing closer together, the ground becoming more uneven. It felt like they were being drawn deeper into the heart of the forest, where ancient magic and danger lay in wait. As they walked, Clara couldn't help but feel the weight of the Vampire King's presence. His aura was immense, the power he held palpable, but there was something else, something distant in his eyes. She had learned much about him, but she still didn't fully understand who he was or what drove him. The mystery surrounding him was part of the reason she had agreed to help him, but it also made her question everything. What was his true purpose? Why had he chosen her? "Are you ready for what lies ahead?" the Vampire King asked suddenly, his voice breaking through her thoughts. Clara glanced up at him, her heart racing. "I don't know if I'm ready for anything, but I have no choice, do I?" The Vampire King's lips curled into a slight smile, his expression unreadable. "No, you don't." As they reached the clearing ahead, Clara saw a massive stone structure rising from the ground, hidden among the trees. It looked ancient, its surface covered in moss and ivy, almost as though it had been there for centuries, waiting for them. The tomb was more imposing than Clara had imagined, its size far greater than anything she had seen before. The entrance was a large archway, covered in intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. The Vampire King stopped in front of it, his gaze fixed on the archway. Clara could feel the power emanating from the structure, and she instinctively took a step back. "This is it," the Vampire King said quietly. "The tomb of the forgotten ones. Inside lies the heart of shadows." Clara swallowed hard. She had heard stories about this place, but to be standing in front of it now, to actually be here, felt like a dream. Or maybe a nightmare. The Vampire King turned to face her, his expression serious. "The tomb is guarded by the spirits of those who once protected the heart of shadows. They will test you. If you are not worthy, you will not survive." Clara's stomach clenched. She had known this mission would be dangerous, but the reality of it was starting to hit her. The heart of shadows was a powerful relic, and the tomb was not going to give it up easily. "What kind of test?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The Vampire King's gaze darkened. "You will face your own fears, your own darkness. Only by overcoming them will you be able to claim the heart of shadows." Clara felt her breath catch in her throat. The thought of facing her own fears, the things she had tried to bury for years, was terrifying. But there was no turning back now. She had agreed to this, and she would see it through. The Vampire King stepped forward and placed his hand on the stone archway, whispering something in an ancient language that Clara couldn't understand. The stone shifted, groaning as it slowly began to open, revealing the darkness within. Clara hesitated, but then took a deep breath and stepped forward. The tomb was cold, the air thick with dust and forgotten memories. As they ventured deeper inside, Clara felt the weight of the past pressing down on her, the echoes of those who had come before them reverberating through the walls. The silence was suffocating. Every step they took seemed to stir something in the shadows, something that was watching them. Stay close, the Vampire King warned, his voice low and commanding. Clara nodded, keeping a tight grip on her nerves as they continued their descent. They reached a large chamber at the heart of the tomb, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. The Heart of Shadows was floating in the center of the room, bathed in an eerie, greenish light. It pulsed with power, its surface shifting as if it were alive. But before Clara could move closer, a sudden chill filled the room. From the shadows, figures began to emerge, ghostly, translucent beings, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Clara froze, her heart racing as the spirits approached. The Vampire King stepped forward, his posture unshaken. "Do not be afraid," he said, his voice steady. "They are the guardians of the heart. You must prove your worth if you wish to claim it." Clara's mind raced. How could she possibly prove her worth to these spirits? What did they want from her? She had faced the darkness before, but never like this. She could feel the pressure mounting, the spirits closing in, their eyes burning with intensity. The room seemed to close around her, and Clara knew that her greatest test had only just begun. The spirits moved closer, their ethereal forms flickering in and out of existence like wisps of smoke. Clara's heart raced in her chest as she stood frozen before them. The room seemed to grow colder, the very air thick with the weight of their presence. She had never felt anything like this before. The Vampire King stood beside her, his expression hard, his eyes focused on the spirits that now surrounded them. Clara could feel his power, a force that pulsed in the room. But even that didn't seem to be enough to keep the spirits at bay. They were unlike anything she had ever encountered. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and their faces were twisted in eternal anguish. They were the guardians of the Heart of Shadows, and Clara knew that only by passing their test would she be able to claim it. The first spirit stepped forward, its translucent form solidifying as it came closer. It was an ancient figure, dressed in tattered robes, its face obscured by a hood. "You seek the Heart of Shadows," the spirit's voice echoed in the room, low and haunting. "But are you truly worthy of its power?" Clara swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I am willing to do whatever it takes," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. The spirit's head tilted as it studied her, its glowing eyes narrowing. "Then you must face your greatest fear," it said, its voice colder now. "Only by confronting what lies within can you claim the heart." Clara's blood ran cold. Her greatest fear? She had faced many fears in her life, but none that had ever felt as real as this. "What must I do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The spirit's lips curled into a twisted smile. "Step forward and face the darkness," it commanded. Clara hesitated, but then she stepped forward, her legs trembling beneath her. As soon as she crossed the threshold, the room around her seemed to shift. The walls began to blur, and the ground beneath her feet felt unstable. The air grew thicker, suffocating. Clara felt as though she was being pulled into something much darker than anything she had ever known. And then, in an instant, it happened. The world around her disappeared, and she was plunged into a nightmare. The first thing she noticed was the sound, the echo of her own voice, calling out in the darkness. "Help me," she screamed, but no one answered. She was alone, completely alone, in a world of shadows. The darkness pressed in on her from all sides, cold and oppressive. Clara's breath hitched in her chest as she struggled to move, but the shadows seemed to bind her, holding her in place. She tried to scream again, but her voice was swallowed by the silence. Panic surged within her. She had been here before, in a place much like this. She had lived this nightmare once, years ago, when she had lost her family. The fear, the helplessness, it all came flooding back. She was back in that moment, standing in the wreckage of her life, powerless to change anything. "No," Clara cried out, shaking with the intensity of her fear. "I won't go back there." The shadows closed in around her, but she fought back, summoning every ounce of strength she had left. "I am not that person anymore," she shouted, her voice shaking but strong. The darkness hesitated for a moment, and Clara used that fleeting moment of clarity to push forward. She reached out, her hands shaking, and found herself grasping onto something solid, a memory, a piece of who she had become. "I won't be afraid," she declared, her voice growing louder with each word. The darkness seemed to recoil, and Clara felt a surge of power within her. She was no longer the scared girl she had been. She had faced her fear and conquered it. As the shadows receded, the room around her returned to its original state, and she found herself standing before the Vampire King once again. The spirits were gone, their presence no longer looming over her. The Vampire King watched her with a look of approval, though his face remained as stoic as ever. "You have passed the test," he said, his voice filled with something Clara couldn't quite place. Respect, perhaps, or admiration. Clara took a deep breath, her body still trembling from the ordeal, but her heart was stronger than it had ever been. She had faced the darkness inside her, and she had come out victorious. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice steadier than before. The Vampire King stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the Heart of Shadows. "Now," he said, "we claim what is ours." He reached out and took the heart, the power within it glowing brighter as it came into his hands. Clara felt the energy radiating from it, the raw force of the curse that had bound the Vampire Kingdom for centuries. The Heart of Shadows was finally theirs, but Clara knew this was only the beginning. There was still one more artifact to find, and they would have to face even greater dangers before they could break the curse. "We are not done yet," the Vampire King said, his voice low and firm. "The final piece awaits, and it will be the most dangerous of all." Clara nodded, her resolve hardening. She had come this far, and she would not stop now. The curse would be broken, no matter what it took. The Vampire King stood tall, holding the Heart of Shadows in his hands, its dark energy radiating outward. Clara could feel the immense power of the artifact, the weight of its history pressing down on her. They had come so far, faced so much, but there was still one final piece to retrieve, one last challenge to overcome. As Clara caught her breath, the Vampire King turned to face her. His eyes gleamed with the same intensity that had guided them through the darkness of the tomb. But now, there was something else in his gaze. Something more personal. "This next piece," he began, his voice steady, "is the most dangerous of all. The Bloodstone." Clara nodded, bracing herself for whatever was to come. "Where do we find it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. The Vampire King hesitated for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "The Bloodstone lies within the Vault of Eternity, a hidden temple beneath the mountains of the East. Few have ever entered, and even fewer have returned." Clara felt a chill run through her as she imagined the dangers that awaited them. The Vault of Eternity was a place of legend, a tomb filled with unimaginable traps, curses, and the undead. It was said that only those with the strongest will and the purest heart could ever make it through. "What are we facing?" she asked, her curiosity mingling with fear. The Vampire King's expression hardened. "You will face tests of strength, courage, and sacrifice. The vault will challenge everything you hold dear, every weakness you possess. Only by overcoming it can you claim the Bloodstone." Clara's pulse quickened at his words. This was more than just an artifact. This was a test of her very soul. But she couldn't turn back now. She had already chosen her path. "How do we get there?" Clara asked, knowing the journey would not be easy. The Vampire King gave a faint smirk, his lips curling into a brief, knowing smile. "We travel through the Night's Passage," he said. "It is the only way to reach the vault without drawing the attention of the undead guardians that protect it." The Night's Passage. Clara had heard rumors of it. An ancient tunnel system that stretched beneath the mountains, a network so old that even the Vampire Kings didn't fully understand its origins. It was said to be both a shortcut and a trap, a place where time itself could warp and shift. "And if we fail to make it through?" Clara asked, the fear creeping back into her voice. The Vampire King's gaze softened just slightly. "Then you will never make it to the vault," he said, his voice carrying a weight of finality. "But I will not allow that to happen." Clara wasn't sure whether it was his confidence or his power that made her feel safe, but she nodded, trusting him more than she ever had before. Together, they left the tomb, the weight of the Heart of Shadows still heavy between them. They moved through the forest, the Vampire King leading with a quiet, unshakable certainty. Clara followed closely behind, her mind racing. The Vault of Eternity, the Bloodstone. She had never imagined such a dangerous quest, but now, it was her reality. They reached the edge of the black forest just as dawn's first light began to peek through the trees. The air was cold, the ground beneath their feet frozen with frost. The night's passage lay ahead, hidden beneath the rocks and vines. Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. The entrance was nearly invisible, a narrow crack in the mountainside, covered with thick moss and creeping ivy. The Vampire King stepped forward and placed his hand on the stone, muttering words in the ancient language that Clara had learned to fear. The crack widened, revealing a dark, winding path that descended deep into the earth. The air smelled of damp earth and decay, and Clara instinctively took a step back, but the Vampire King was already moving into the tunnel. "Stay close," he commanded, his voice low and firm. Clara swallowed hard and followed, the darkness closing in around them. As they moved deeper into the passage, the air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading them down further and further into the mountain. The darkness seemed to have a life of its own, shifting and moving with each step. Clara could feel her heart pounding in her chest as they pressed on. The Vampire King led with confidence, but even he seemed to be keeping a careful eye on their surroundings. They came to a fork in the path, and Clara hesitated. The Vampire King stopped and turned to her. "The night's passage is filled with illusions," he said. "Choose the wrong path, and we will be lost forever." Clara's eyes narrowed as she glanced down each corridor. One path was lit by a faint, eerie light, while the other was swallowed by complete darkness. She could feel something pulling her toward the light, but the Vampire King's words echoed in her mind. She couldn't afford to make a mistake now. "We go this way," she said, pointing to the dark passage. The Vampire King studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You've made the right choice." They moved forward, and as they did, the air seemed to shift, becoming heavier, thicker with magic. The walls began to close in around them, the tunnel narrowing with each step. Clara's heart raced, but she kept moving, trusting in the Vampire King's guidance. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached the end of the passage. A massive door stood before them, its surface covered in intricate runes that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Clara's breath caught in her throat. This was it. The Vault of Eternity was on the other side. The Vampire King stepped forward and placed his hand on the door, murmuring a word in the ancient language. The door slowly creaked open, revealing the tomb beyond. Clara could feel the power of the vault emanating from within, and she knew that the final test was about to begin. The massive door of the Vault of Eternity groaned as it slowly opened, revealing the darkness within. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she stepped forward, her heart hammering in her chest. The air was thick with an ancient power that seemed to pulse with every beat of her heart. The Vampire King stood beside her, his expression unreadable as he studied the dark chamber ahead. There was no turning back now. This was the final step, the last test before they could break the curse. The vault was vast, the walls stretching high above them, covered in ancient symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. At the center of the chamber, a pedestal stood, and on it, the bloodstone. It glowed with an eerie red light, pulsing as though it were alive, its power undeniable. Clara's eyes were drawn to it, but she could feel something more, something lurking in the shadows. The Vampire King stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the bloodstone. "This is it," he murmured, his voice low. "The final piece. But we are not alone." Clara's senses tingled, and she glanced around the chamber, suddenly aware of the dark figures that moved just beyond her sight. They were watching, waiting. "What are they?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The Vampire King's eyes flickered with a dark intensity. "The guardians of the bloodstone," he said. "They will test us. Only those who prove themselves worthy may claim it." The air around them seemed to shift, the temperature dropping as the shadows grew longer. Clara felt an oppressive weight pressing down on her, as if the vault itself was alive, testing her, measuring her worth. From the darkness, a figure stepped forward. It was tall, cloaked in shadow, with glowing eyes that pierced through the darkness like burning embers. Its voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant. "Who dares to seek the bloodstone?" it asked, its tone both challenging and foreboding. The Vampire King did not flinch. "I do," he said, his voice filled with authority. "I seek the final piece to break the curse." The Guardian's eyes narrowed. You seek power, it said. But power is not given. It must be earned. Only the worthy may claim the bloodstone. The chamber seemed to tremble as the guardian raised its hand, and Clara felt a surge of energy fill the room. The shadows around them swirled, and from the darkness, other figures emerged, each more terrifying than the last. Some were humanoid, their eyes glowing with malice, while others were creatures of nightmare, their forms twisted and unnatural. The tests will begin, the guardian said, its voice echoing in Clara's mind. You must prove that you have the strength to wield the power of the bloodstone. Fail, and you will be lost forever. Clara's heart raced. She had faced fear, darkness, and death itself, but this felt different. The weight of the challenge pressed down on her, and for a moment, she felt the pull of doubt. Was she truly worthy? But then, she glanced at the vampire king, standing beside her, his expression unwavering. He had chosen her, trusted her, and now it was time for her to trust herself. The guardian stepped forward, its eyes locking onto Clara's. Your first test, it said, is one of courage. You must face your deepest fear and overcome it. Only then will you be able to move forward. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had faced many fears in her life, but she had never been forced to confront them like this. The shadows around her began to shift, and suddenly, she was no longer standing in the vault. She was back in her childhood home, the place she had once loved. The walls were cracked, the windows shattered, and standing before her, cold and menacing, was her greatest fear, her father, the man who had once broken her spirit with his cruelty. You were never enough, he sneered, his voice like ice. Clara froze, her heart pounding as the memory of his words cut through her like a knife. She had spent years running from this fear, hiding from the memories, burying them deep inside. But now, in this moment, she had no choice but to face it. I am enough, Clara whispered, her voice trembling but strong. I have always been enough. The shadow of her father laughed, his form twisting into something monstrous. You think you can overcome me? You think you can face the darkness you've hidden from? Clara's chest tightened as the figure loomed over her. But she stood her ground. She had come this far, and she would not back down now. I am not afraid of you, she said, her voice rising with each word. I have conquered my past. I am not the girl I once was. As she spoke, the figure of her father began to fade, the shadows receding as Clara stood tall, her resolve strengthening. She had faced her deepest fear and emerged stronger for it. The room around her began to shift once again, and she found herself back in the vault, standing before the vampire king and the guardians. The guardian who had spoken earlier nodded, its glowing eyes acknowledging her strength. You have passed the first test, it said, its voice softer now. Clara's heart still raced, but she could feel the weight of the power in the room. She had faced her fear, and she had won. What is the next test? She asked, her voice steady. The guardian did not answer immediately, but gestured to the bloodstone, which pulsed with a dark energy. The next test, it said, is one of sacrifice. Only those who are willing to give up what they hold most dear can claim the power of the bloodstone. Clara's stomach churned. Sacrifice? What would she have to give up? She turned to the vampire king, his eyes still locked on the bloodstone. She knew then that the next trial would be even harder than the first. But she had come this far. She would face whatever challenge lay ahead. The curse would be broken, and she would be the one to do it. Clara stood before the bloodstone, its dark energy pulsing with an almost tangible power. The room around her felt heavy with anticipation. The guardian spirits loomed in the shadows, their glowing eyes watching her every move. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of the test pressing down on her. She had passed the first trial, confronting her greatest fear and overcoming it. But this next trial was far more daunting. Sacrifice. The word echoed in her mind, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling that this would be the hardest challenge she would ever face. What must I sacrifice? She asked, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. The guardian who had spoken earlier stepped forward, its form flickering as if it were a shadow. To claim the bloodstone's power, it said, its voice cold and reverberating. You must give up something you hold most dear. Something that defines you, something that you would fight to keep. Only then can you wield the power that comes with it. Clara's stomach clenched at the thought. What could she possibly give up? She had already lost so much in her life, and she had fought so hard to get this far. The idea of losing anything more felt unbearable. The Vampire King stood silently by her side, watching her with his usual unreadable expression. Clara glanced at him, but his gaze was focused on the bloodstone, his face masked in contemplation. She turned back to the pedestal where the stone lay, its crimson glow casting a haunting light across the chamber. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. The guardian stepped closer, its presence overwhelming. "You have no choice," it said, its voice now laced with finality. "The power of the bloodstone demands a price. Will you pay it?" Clara's breath hitched as the weight of its words sank in. What was she willing to sacrifice for this power? The fate of the vampire kingdom, the breaking of the curse. Could it really be worth it? Could she bear the consequences of this decision? The room seemed to close in around her, the shadows shifting as the tension grew. The guardian's eyes burned with intensity. "You must make your choice," it commanded. "Only by letting go of what you hold most dear will you gain what you seek." Clara felt her pulse quicken as she struggled to come to terms with the decision before her. She thought of her grandmother, the woman who had taught her so much, who had been the last link to her past. Her memories with her were precious, irreplaceable. Could she give that up? Could she abandon the last person she had loved? The thought of losing that connection, of losing the one person who had truly cared for her, was unbearable. Clara closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had already lost so much. She had fought to get here, to face the challenges and trials that had come her way. But now, standing on the edge of the final test, she realized that the cost of failure was too high. She could not afford to walk away. But could she let go of everything she had left? "What if I refuse?" Clara asked, her voice barely audible. The guardian's response was a cold laugh. "Then you will never know the true power of the bloodstone. You will never break the curse, and everything you have fought for will be lost forever." Clara stood there, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She thought of all the suffering, all the pain, all the sacrifices made to get to this point. She thought of the Vampire King, the powerful being who had brought her into this world of darkness and danger. He had trusted her, and now she had to trust herself. The choice was hers. Her thoughts turned to the bloodstone, its dark power beckoning her, promising her the strength to defeat the curse. The temptation to claim it was overwhelming, but the price was so high. "I will sacrifice what I must," Clara said finally, her voice steady with resolve. "I am willing to give up what is necessary, even if it hurts." The bloodstone pulsed, its crimson light growing brighter, as though it was acknowledging her decision. The guardian stepped back, its form dissipating into the shadows. "You have chosen," it said, its voice fading. "Now, claim the power." Clara took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her heart pounded as she reached out, her fingers brushing against the surface of the bloodstone. The moment her skin made contact, a surge of power filled her, rushing through her veins like liquid fire. She gasped, her body trembling as the energy of the bloodstone coursed through her. She could feel its immense power, its dark promise of strength and control. But she also felt something else, something deep inside her, a part of herself that she had just let go of. The pain was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the strength she felt now. The sacrifice had been made, and with it, the power of the bloodstone was hers. Clara pulled her hand away, the bloodstone now glowing brightly in her palm. She had done it. She had passed the test. But as the power of the stone continued to pulse through her, she realized that this was only the beginning. The curse was still not broken, and the path ahead was filled with even greater challenges. She turned to the Vampire King, her eyes filled with determination. "Let's finish this," she said, her voice strong. The Vampire King nodded, his gaze filled with something like pride, but his face remained as stoic as ever. Together, they would face whatever came next. The curse would be broken, and they would be the ones to do it. Clara stood tall, the bloodstone pulsing with power in her hand. She could feel its dark energy coursing through her, its weight both a burden and a source of strength. The Vampire King stood beside her, watching her closely, his expression unreadable as always. With the final artifact now in their possession, they were ready to face the curse head-on. The chamber around them seemed to hum with a new intensity, the air thick with magic and expectation. Clara could feel the weight of everything they had fought for pressing on her shoulders. The path ahead was unclear, but she knew one thing for certain. They had to break the curse. There was no turning back now. The curse must be broken, the Vampire King said quietly, his voice carrying a deep sense of finality. Clara turned to him, her heart racing. But how? She asked. We have all the pieces now. The Heart of Shadows, the Eye of Eternity, and the Bloodstone. What now? The Vampire King's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light of the chamber. Now, we must combine the three artifacts, he said. Only when they are united can their true power be unlocked. Clara nodded, but doubt still lingered in her mind. She had seen the power of the artifacts, but she had no idea what would happen when they were combined. What kind of force would they be unleashing? And would it be enough to break the curse that had bound his kind for centuries? But the artifacts are so powerful, Clara said hesitantly. What if the curse is stronger? The Vampire King looked at her, his gaze piercing. The curse has kept us bound for centuries, he said, but it is not invincible. The power of the artifacts combined is the key. We must face it together, or we will fail. Clara's heart tightened as she thought about everything they had endured to get to this point. She had come so far, faced so many trials, and lost so much already. Could she truly do this? Could she wield the power of the Bloodstone and the other artifacts to break the curse? She glanced at the Vampire King, who was already preparing to unite the artifacts. His calm confidence made her feel as if she could face anything. She stepped forward, ready to face the final challenge. Together, they approached the ancient altar in the center of the chamber, the Bloodstone still glowing in Clara's hand. The Vampire King stood beside her, his hand outstretched. Clara placed the Bloodstone into his palm, feeling its energy surge in the air around them. He closed his fingers around it, and for a moment, everything in the chamber seemed to freeze. The room darkened, the very air seeming to hold its breath as the Vampire King began to speak in the ancient language. Clara couldn't understand the words, but she could feel the power of the ritual building. The Heart of Shadows and the Eye of Eternity were placed on the altar beside the Bloodstone, and as the Vampire King continued his chant, the artifacts began to glow brighter. Clara could feel the magic in the room intensify, the pressure building as the energy from the three artifacts fused together. It was as if the world around them was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, the air cracked with a sharp, violent energy. Clara stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. The artifacts glowed with an intensity that she had never seen before, their combined power radiating outward in waves of energy. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and Clara could feel the darkness of the curse itself shifting, trying to resist the power they had unleashed. It's working, the Vampire King said, his voice tense but filled with determination. We must hold the power. Do not let it slip. Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself as she focused on the energy surrounding her. The combined power of the artifacts was overwhelming, but she could feel the curse weakening, the chains that had bound the Vampire Kingdom for so long beginning to loosen. We're so close, Clara whispered, her voice filled with awe. We can do this. But as the energy surged, something unexpected happened. A dark shadow appeared before them, rising from the ground like a nightmare made flesh. It was the curse itself, the dark force that had held the Vampire Kingdom in its grip for centuries. It was more terrifying than anything Clara had ever seen, a swirling mass of shadows and fear. The Vampire King stepped forward, his eyes glowing fiercely as he faced the shadow. This is the true test, he said, his voice cold with determination. We must destroy the source of the curse, or it will consume everything. Clara's heart raced as she watched the shadow loom before them, its presence suffocating the air. She could feel the weight of its power, the darkness trying to pull them both into its grasp. She looked at the Vampire King, seeing the strength in his eyes, the same strength that had carried them through everything so far. He had fought for centuries, and now, with Clara by his side, they were going to end it. Clara stepped forward, her grip tightening around the Bloodstone as the energy surged once more. She could feel the curse weakening, its grip on the world faltering. The shadow hissed, the darkness shrinking away as Clara focused all of her energy on the artifact in her hand. The Vampire King raised his hand, his power merging with Clara's. Together, they released a final burst of energy, a wave of light so bright that it engulfed the chamber. The shadow screamed as it was torn apart by the power of the artifacts. The room shook, the very foundations of the curse breaking apart. Clara could feel the weight of it lifting, the darkness finally retreating. For a moment, everything went quiet. The chamber was still, the air clear and free of the suffocating presence of the curse. Clara felt the bloodstone grow warm in her hand, the power fading. She looked at the Vampire King, their mission complete. The curse was broken. They had done it. The silence that followed the destruction of the curse was profound, almost deafening. Clara stood there, her heart still pounding in her chest, the bloodstone now a faint glow in her hand. The air felt different, lighter, as if the oppressive weight that had once hung over them had been lifted. The Vampire King, his eyes still glowing faintly, turned to face her. There was something different in his gaze now, something softer, though his expression remained as stoic as ever. "It's over," Clara whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The Vampire King nodded slowly, his eyes not leaving hers. "Yes, it is." They stood there for a moment, both taking in the enormity of what they had just accomplished. The curse that had bound the vampire kingdom for centuries was no more. The power that had kept his kind in eternal servitude was broken. But even in the quiet aftermath, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. The mission was complete, and yet she couldn't help but wonder what came next. What did this victory mean for them, for the vampire kingdom, and for her? "What happens now?" Clara asked, her voice quieter now, almost uncertain. The Vampire King turned away from her, his gaze shifting to the remnants of the curse that still lingered in the air. "Now we rebuild," he said. "The kingdom is free, but it will take time for things to settle. The power of the curse was far-reaching, and it will take effort to restore balance." Clara nodded, absorbing his words. She had come so far, and yet she felt a deep sense of loss, as if the finality of their victory had left something behind. She had fought alongside the Vampire King, had trusted him, and in some strange way, had become part of his world. But now that the curse was broken, what role did she have to play? "And what about me?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What happens to me?" The Vampire King's expression softened, though his eyes remained as distant as ever. "You are free," he said, his voice low. "Free to choose your own path, just as I am. You have helped me more than you could possibly know." Clara's heart tightened. She had fought for freedom, but now that it was within her grasp, she felt an emptiness she hadn't expected. She had been part of something bigger than herself, part of a world that she had never imagined, and now she was standing on the edge of it, unsure of where to go next. The Vampire King turned back toward her, his gaze unwavering. "But know this, Clara," he said, his voice tinged with something she couldn't quite place. "I will not forget what you have done. You have earned your place in this world, in my world." Clara looked up at him, her heart fluttering at the sincerity in his words. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something deeper in his eyes, something that transcended their mission, something that reached beyond the curse. But before she could respond, the air around them seemed to shift once again. A sudden gust of wind blew through the chamber, and the remnants of the curse swirled in the air like smoke. Clara's eyes widened as she instinctively stepped back, feeling the power of the artifacts begin to fade. The Vampire King's gaze turned sharp again as he reached for the bloodstone, which had begun to lose its glow. "We must go," he said quickly. "The power is weakening." Clara didn't hesitate. They had done what they came to do, but the world was still fragile, still in the process of healing. They couldn't afford to stay too long. With the last remnants of the curse fading into the air, the Vampire King led Clara toward the exit of the vault, the powerful artifacts now in their hands. As they left the dark chamber behind, Clara couldn't help but feel the weight of their victory. She had been part of something that would change the course of history for both humans and vampires. But now, she had to figure out where she fit in this new world. They emerged from the mountains, the fresh air filling their lungs as they stepped into the dawn of a new era. The sun, barely rising, cast a soft glow over the land, its light a symbol of the new beginning they had forged. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lift off her shoulders. The curse was broken. The vampire kingdom was free. And now, she was free too. "Thank you," Clara said quietly, her voice full of gratitude and something deeper, something that she didn't fully understand yet. The Vampire King looked at her, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his gaze that softened. "You've earned more than that," he replied. "You've earned your place here, with me." The words hung in the air, and Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just the power of the artifacts that had changed everything. It was their shared journey, their shared sacrifices that had bound them together. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Clara was no longer just a stranger in this world. She was part of it, and whatever came next, she knew she would face it with the Vampire King by her side. Clara stood beside the Vampire King, the weight of their victory slowly sinking in. The curse that had bound his kind for centuries was finally broken, and yet, as they stood there together, the world around them felt strangely quiet. The battle was over, the darkness lifted, but a new journey had just begun. They had both changed in ways they hadn't anticipated. For Clara, the world had opened up, revealing a destiny she never imagined. She wasn't just the girl who had answered the call. She had become a key figure in the new world they had forged together. The Vampire King turned to her, his expression softer than before, though still holding the weight of a lifetime of power and responsibility. "You have proven yourself, Clara," he said, his voice low but filled with an undeniable respect. "Not many would have had the strength to do what you did." Clara looked up at him, her heart still racing from everything that had transpired. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said quietly. She paused, her gaze falling to the bloodstone, now dimmed in her hand. "But now that it's over, what do we do?" The Vampire King's eyes softened, and for the first time, Clara saw a flicker of something beyond the centuries of leadership and battle in his gaze. "Now, we rebuild," he said simply. "The kingdom is free, but it will take time to restore it. The bloodline has been broken, and the old ways must change." Clara nodded, her mind racing. The Vampire Kingdom was free from the curse, but the world they now faced was not one of certainty. What kind of future would they have? She had fought for freedom, but what did freedom look like when the very fabric of their world had been ripped apart? She glanced at the Vampire King, sensing the same uncertainty in him. "What about us?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happens now, for you and me?" The Vampire King turned to her fully, his piercing gaze searching her face as if weighing her words. "We are both free now," he said slowly, "and you have earned your place in this world. But the path ahead is uncertain for both of us." Clara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had known this journey was never going to be simple. She had joined the Vampire King in the fight to break the curse, but now that it was broken, she was faced with a new kind of uncertainty. They had forged a bond throughout their journey, but what did that mean in a world that had shifted so drastically? "Do you want to stay?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Do you want to help rebuild, to lead with me?" Clara looked at him, her mind racing as she processed his words. She had come so far, faced unimaginable challenges, and yet, here she was, free to choose her future. "I don't know," Clara said honestly. "Everything has changed. I've changed, but I know that I can't go back to the way things were." She paused, feeling a sudden rush of clarity. "I want to help, but I also need to find my place in this new world. My own path." The Vampire King nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Then you must take that path, Clara. We will rebuild together, but you must decide where you want to stand in the new world. You are not bound by the past anymore." Clara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. She wasn't just a part of his world anymore. She had her own place in it, one that she would define for herself. And that was the most freeing feeling she had ever known. "I will stand beside you," she said, her voice steady now, filled with a new determination. "But I will also carve my own way." The Vampire King's lips curled into a faint smile, and for a moment, the coldness that had always surrounded him seemed to lift. "Then together, we will create a future, one that belongs to both of us." Clara felt a warmth in her chest at his words. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she was no longer just a bystander in this world. She was part of its creation. The journey ahead would be difficult, but she was ready. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The curse was broken, the vampires were free, and she, too, was free to choose her future. The future was uncertain, But with the Vampire King by her side, she knew they could face whatever came next. Together, they would forge a new path, one that neither of them had ever imagined, but one that was theirs to create. The world was open to them now, and the possibilities were endless. Vampire stories have always captivated audiences with their blend of danger, romance, and supernatural elements. In this thrilling tale, Clara embarks on a journey that takes her deep into the world of vampires, uncovering ancient curses, facing daunting challenges, and discovering her own strength along the way. From the moment she answers a mysterious call, she is thrust into a world filled with secrets and hidden powers. As she bonds with a powerful vampire king, Clara learns the importance of trust, sacrifice, and the price of freedom. The stakes are high as they work together to break a centuries-old curse that has kept the vampire kingdom bound. Their journey is filled with twists, intense trials, and powerful vampire lore, making this a standout addition to the world of vampire stories. The final confrontation with the curse itself tests Clara's courage and resolve, forcing her to face her own fears and make an unimaginable sacrifice. But in the end, she emerges stronger, free to choose her own path in a world that has forever changed. These vampire stories not only explore the allure of the supernatural, but also the transformative power of self-discovery and resilience. Whether you are a fan of ancient vampire tales or looking for a new, exciting adventure, this story captures all the elements that make vampire stories unforgettable. As Clara and the Vampire King prepare to rebuild a broken kingdom, they also forge a new future, one where they can both be free from the past. This story is a must-read for anyone who loves vampire stories full of mystery, magic, and the complexities of the human and vampire heart.